listener production.
Hi, Sasha Barbagat with you. Welcome to The Briefing. Have you ever treated your mental health like you're doing a first aid course? Well, one prison is doing just that, with over 200 inmates and 70 staff at the Wellington Correctional Centre in New South Wales participating in mental health first aid training.
Well, I think it gets overlooked not only in the correctional system but in society in general. There is still a little bit of a stigma. We're not completely clear of that yet in society, and what happens in the correctional centres really are a little bit of a reflection on what happens in society in general.
That chat coming up in the second half of this episode. First though, it's time for the headlines with Chris Spiru. It's Tuesday, September 17.
Good morning, Sash. The man thought to be behind another attempt on Donald Trump's life has appeared in court on gun charges. 58-year-old Ryan Routh was arrested yesterday after Secret Service officers noticed him hiding in bushes near a Florida golf course where the former US president was playing. Agents fired a number of shots at him, but he managed to drive away and was stopped by law enforcement about 72 k's from the course.
Now, in court, Routh was formally charged with possessing a firearm despite being a convicted felon and possessing a firearm with an obliterated serial number. More charges are possible as an investigation into the incident continues. So what's the reaction been to this latest assassination attempt? First off, Donald Trump has thanked the Secret Service for keeping him safe. We also heard from his running mate, JD Vance, who said Trump is in remarkably good spirits considering what happened. It'll be interesting to see him speak publicly about this. He talked quite a lot about the initial assassination attempt, of course. It was very public and obviously quite traumatic. So it'll be interesting to hear what he has to say once he actually comes out and does another rally or another public appearance. Joe Biden, meantime, made a passionate speech as well, speaking out against political violence.
In America, we resolve our differences peacefully at the ballot box, not at the end of a gun. America suffered too many times the tragedy of an assassin's bullet. It solves nothing and just tears the country apart.
Back home, Anthony Albanese also commented, labelling it concerning. He also talked about wanting democracy to unfold peacefully. In terms of how the public's reacted, Chris, I found it a little interesting to notice, I don't know, it wasn't being talked about as much as I thought it would yesterday.
No, definitely not. And I think the first one was so shocking. And this one, it didn't live up to how terrible and tragic that first one was, which is great. Like, it's really great. We actually don't want to see presidential candidates and nominees being assassinated and being attacked in these attacks. But you're right, the sentiment and the narratives around it are very, very different.
Yeah. Also, we have learnt more about the man who allegedly wanted to kill him, Routh. He was a staunch supporter of Ukraine and he actually travelled to the country to try and fight with its armed services and was rejected. We also know he voted for Trump in 2016 but later turned against him and spoke out in support of other political candidates. So a complicated character by the looks of it.
Yeah, definitely. And investigators said that they found 2 backpacks they think belongs to him, and in them was a GoPro camera, so they believe he was looking to either film it or live stream the event. A big fight is set to continue over Labor's housing policy after the Greens refused to back it in Parliament yesterday. First off, this is over 2 bills, Sasha, so stick with me. The first is Help to Buy. That's a shared equity program that'll see the government pay for up to 40% of a home for low-income buyers. The other is the Build to Rent scheme, which aims to incentivise developers to build rentals by offering tax concessions. Yesterday, the Greens blocked both bills after teaming up with the coalition back in June to oppose them, arguing the schemes will drive up prices and give unnecessary tax breaks to property developers. That sparked an angry reaction from the PM and Labor, both of which have urged the party to get the job done and back the bills.
Yeah, so the Greens, however, want to push for changes to Labor's housing policy and this legislation. So what they want is more spending on public housing, as well as a national rent freeze and the removal of tax concessions on investment properties and the capital gains tax. So this is going to continue playing out. The Greens have said they are open to negotiating. However, the PM was accused of being like a bulldozer, which we heard similar comments about Scott Morrison when he was Prime Minister, in the fact that Labor isn't seeming to want to budge on this. They are sticking to their guns. So someone's going to have to capitulate. Someone's going to have to say, okay, all right, we'll change it. So it'll be, or it'll stay deadlocked and Labor won't have a housing policy, and that will not look good going into the next federal election. Also happening today, the Coalition's going to unveil its costings for its housing policy. Now that is the super scheme. So they would allow people to take up to $50,000 out of their superannuation to go towards a deposit on a house. Now, the Liberals will argue that by helping people aged between 35 and 59 into their own home and out of the rental market, the budget would save $1 billion in reduced Commonwealth rent assistance support in its first 4 years of operation. And over a decade, the budget would be $2.8 billion better off. That's according to these costings. The idea, however, has been attacked by economists and parts of the superannuation sector, which argue this scheme would drive up house prices and would also end up costing the government billions through higher aged pension costs because people won't have as much super to retire on. So housing, we are in a housing war again, and it's really depressing as regular Aussies sitting here, either wanting to have a cheaper rental for my family or be able to buy a house and get on the property ladder. And we've just got these politicians arguing in Canberra. I think people are going to get really sick of this in the next few months.
Back to the US now, where the Murdoch family's $29 billion succession court battle has officially kicked off. According to reports, Rupert Murdoch and his 4 eldest children have failed to settle out of court on how to distribute his global media empire when he passes away. So, a private court case is getting underway in Nevada today, where the 93-year-old is reportedly seeking to change their family trust to hand full control of News Corp and Fox News to his eldest son, Lachlan. Now, Sash, if you remember, Lachlan took the reins from Rupert, who stepped down last year, and he's been running both companies ever since.
Now, his 3 eldest siblings, that's Prudence, Elizabeth and James, are set to oppose the change. So under this family trust, which was created 25 years ago, the Murdoch family gets 8 votes on the board of News Corp and Fox. Rupert gets 4. Each child holds 1 each. Now, originally, his passing would have seen his votes distributed equally, but he wants them to go to Lachlan, and I'm guessing Lachlan probably wants them all to go to Lachlan as well. Now, there is a lot more to this story. We did a deep dive on this last Tuesday, September 10. Highly recommend going back and having a listen to it and just getting your head around everything that we might see unfold over the next few weeks. And a school in New South Wales has officially adopted a 4-day school week. Chevalier College in the state's Southern Highlands says the move will allow senior students to learn remotely 1 day a week and allow all students to take part in self-regulated education on Mondays. Now, this follows a successful trial which happened earlier this year, and the school says they found it helped equip students with the skills and mindset required for success in an evolving world, whatever that means. I think basically they saw that it benefited students' learning in different ways, which is obviously great. Really interesting, Chris, to see more. Not only we hear about it in workplaces, but looking at it in schools as well. I've said for years that it's a conspiracy, whoever set up the 8-hour school day and work week and the 5 days, and we are slaves. I think this is great.
Although I will say what I like about this and what I think they meant in that statement was like, I don't know about you, but working from home for the first time was actually tough. It was hard for me to knuckle down and actually do work and not be like, oh, I'm at home, let me play with the dog. Oh, let me do a load of washing. I can start my cooking now. So I think it's good. It's getting kids in that mindset and kind of prepping them for, the next steps after school, which I'm all for.
Chevalier College has said it'll make its research publicly available for other schools who are interested in adopting a flexibility policy. I did try and find out how many schools are actually doing this. We know a few trials have been announced. There was one in Queensland, as in the state allowed schools within the state to participate in trials. But the data isn't actually collected on schools that have officially enforced this policy. So we were unable to find that information quickly. This is the first one I've heard of that's officially adopted a 4-day school week. But very cool, very cool. Lucky kids. Thank you, Chris. Next up is Helen Smith's chat about a mental health program for prisoners.
Hey, it's Helen Smith for The Briefing. Prison is arguably one of the toughest places to stay healthy mentally, and with mental health often being overlooked and underfunded, one correctional centre is trying to change that. Wellington Correctional Centre once had a reputation as one of the toughest country jails in New South Wales. But recently, more than 200 inmates and 70 staff at the centre participated in mental health first aid training, with correctional officers and inmates learning side by side. The training is delivered by First Nations-led organisation, the National Wellbeing Alliance, which is important as First Nation inmates make up over 60% of the population at Wellington. The program is open to both First Nations and non-Indigenous participants, being described as critical mental health first aid. Joining me now is Brad Peebles, who is the Governor of Wellington Correctional Centre. Brad, welcome to the briefing. Why did you greenlight this course?
Well, in times past, Helen, I was actually a mental health first aid trainer myself, so I was pretty well aware of the value of the program. And in those days, I used to run it pretty much exclusively for corrective services staff. But the opportunity arose for us to deliver to a group that consisted of both the staff and the inmates, and that's pretty unique within corrections anywhere, I think. And both the staff and inmates were willing, so there was fertile ground for us to do so to speak. So I was very happy to go ahead with it.
I'm curious to know why the program is called Mental Health First Aid Training. Can you explain that?
Well, it's exactly what it is. If you can think of an ordinary first aid course that doesn't render the person doing the course a medical expert or a paramedic, it does give you some basic strategies to deal with an injury when you're faced with it unexpectedly. The mental health first aid's no different. It gives you a toolkit and an understanding of what you're confronted with when you encounter a person that's suffering symptoms of a serious mental illness, which is something that people really aren't exposed to in life, unless you do some training in that respect. So it's very, very valuable, well, for anyone, even for home, family, friends, and that kind of thing, but especially in an industry that deals with people that are, much higher on the scale in terms of suffering mental illness and, where the demographic that we deal with involves, quite a lot of mental illness. The job can be quite stressful too, so it's a win in terms of the staff participating.
What's the program that was run at the Wellington Correctional Centre? What did that look like?
So it was run by one of our local not-for-profit organisations. It's actually an Aboriginal organisation which really meshes in well with us because our inmate demographic is pretty much, I think it's around about 60% Aboriginal. So it was an excellent opportunity to get the Indigenous people looking after the Indigenous people and staff and others. So it was outsourced to that organisation. They really came in and took it over 100%, and they were just fantastic. The delivery was really appropriate to the audience. They were able to certainly relate to the people that they were delivering the program to, both staff and inmates. There was quite a lot of homework done by the team before they entered the centre, so they had a really good idea of the culture and what to expect. And all in all, it was a really, really, really worthwhile exercise.
And how important is mental health for rehabilitation?
Look, it's very important. A lot of the inmates that cross our paths and come into jail have come from pretty deprived backgrounds where, mental health problems are generational, particularly with our female inmates. So ignoring the mental health factors that play on behaviour really ignores a large component of the product. So it's very important that we get that right, that the staff really understand mental health issues, that inmates not only understand them, but they know how to reach out for help, and that they have a bit of an understanding on how they can help their peers, because it's often an inmate that will become aware of another inmate's struggling. And in this way, they can actually be the first point of call to a certain extent.
Medical and legal experts often say that mental health programs like these can reduce reoffending. Can you explain why that is?
In criminological circles, each offence is looked at in terms of the dynamics around the offence. So you look at the social causes of the offence, the individual causes of the offence, socioeconomic causes. And state of mind, mental health, which includes things like drug addiction, in the literature and according to all the research, weigh very, very heavily in, whether people offend or reoffend. So it's one of the dynamics in offending that we can't afford to miss at all. There may be other things, criminal attitudes, things like that. But the mental health aspect is certainly one of the central ones, and it's very important that we get that right and that it's central into our treatment plans.
Yeah, for sure. In saying that, why does mental health often get overlooked in the correctional system?
Look, Helen, I think it gets overlooked not only in the correctional system but in society in general. There is still a little bit of a stigma. We're not completely clear of that yet in society, and what happens in the correctional centres really are a little bit of a reflection on what happens in society in general. And I think when confronted with someone who, for instance, is floridly psychotic, people do have a bit of a sense of fear. They have a bit of a sense of not having any control and a bit of a sense of, having no idea how to address it. And a program like the Mental Health First Aid program fills in those gaps. It actually puts a little bit of a framework of understanding around really aberrant behaviour, as I said, whether it's psychosis or depression, people being withdrawn. And the whole discussion around suicide, for instance, suicide is one of the biggest killers of young people in the country, and it certainly is the biggest cause of unnatural deaths in correctional centres. So any strategy that we can bring in, any help we can get from external organisations to partner with is very welcome, particularly, when it's involving Indigenous inmates.
Yeah, you mentioned before your experience as a mental health facilitator and how staff can often get trained in mental health training. But why has it taken this long for a program kind of like this that involves staff and the inmates to be doing it together?
Look, I think it's a cultural barrier. The thing with staff and inmates in a correctional centre is the majority of staff are uniformed staff with a custodial role. And it's actually a dual role. It's both custodian and case manager, but there's always a line that has to be drawn, and that line's necessary. But it also does create some artificial barriers to this kind of thing going ahead. At the end of the day, mental health first aid, how we deal with it, is something that's shared intimately by both staff and inmates. It's something that we deal with every day. So it's just a common sense evolution, I guess, of how we do business in corrections to involve both inmates and staff in how we respond to the problem. So, yeah, cultural barrier, I suppose, but it's really gratifying to see that we're breaking through those barriers now, especially at Wellington, which is really good.
Yeah, for sure. And since the program, have you seen any direct positive impacts from either staff or inmates?
The evidence that we've got is anecdotal at the moment, but what we're seeing is a greater willingness of a lot of the inmates to come forward and express that they're struggling. And in a lot of cases, that's to other inmates who, after having done the course, have a good toolbox on how to react. So they know how to react. They know that it's important to reach out to the staff, whether it's correctional officers or our justice health people. And the heightened awareness amongst the staff too has certainly increased the empathy, because there's an increased understanding around aberrant behaviour, I guess you could say. So I think all knowledge is good knowledge, and that's what we're seeing, a more open acceptance of mental illness, plus a bit of a knowledge framework around how to respond when you're confronted with it, which is the target of the course.
Prison is a rough environment, and as you said, many people are coming in with pre-existing conditions with their mental health. Why is it so hard to stay mentally healthy in prison?
It's an artificial environment. There's a security aspect that has to be applied because people that are imprisoned often have committed violent crimes or have an element of danger to society. So we can't forget that. We do have to hold people in an environment that provides security, which is not natural. So, any time you're placed in an unnatural environment, I think that it does have an impact on all aspects of your life, whether it's mental health, social, that kind of thing. And it's really up to us to find ways to bridge that gap, to fill that hole that's created by the necessity of our security protocols. And once again, this mental health first aid training is something that can actually fit into that gap in prisons, because it's a very structured course. It's non-judgmental, and it talks to people on the level that they're at, for all over the spectrum, So it's a very good fit.
Will this be an ongoing program, and what's the hopes for its future?
Yeah, we certainly hope that we can run the program again. I mean, we do have a high turnover of inmates at Wellington because we hold a lot of remands. A lot of our inmates are only here for a short time, whether it be a few weeks or a few months. So our intention certainly is to continue to partner with organisations to run this program, but, others as well, that will continue to improve the environment for the inmates and the staff.
Great, Brad. Thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing.
No worries. It's a pleasure.
That was Brad Peebles, Governor of Wellington Correctional Centre. And that's it for this episode of The Briefing. But before we go, we'd love it if you could share this ep with someone you think might enjoy it as well. If you want to keep up with our other content, you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast, and on TikTok and YouTube, just search for Listener Newsroom. And we'll be back in your feed with another ep this afternoon. I'm Helen Smith. See you next time.
Listener.